On the 16th of January 2007, an Israeli border police shot and killed my 10 years old daughter Abir in front of her school in Anata, where I live.
I'm an Israeli who lost his daughter to a suicide bombing on the 4th of September 1997. And I'm a product of an education system. These are two societies at war.
Victory, tragedy, poverty. By the end of World War II, Europe had been ripped apart at its seams. The globe's second extended industrial-scale conflict had exhausted every power on the continent. Formerly wealthy, prosperous commercial and residential districts in major cities like London and Munich, once the peak of global civilization, were bombed to ashes. Most tragically, the humiliated desperation of the German people after the First World War and the incredible ruthlessness of their leader resulted in the deaths of nearly 6 million Jewish men, women, and children. After the Second World War, Europeans snapped out of a trance. Gone was the pre-war urge to pursue vengeance and escalate violence tit for tat. Instead, the West was forced to ask a terrifying existential question: what now? Yet from these ashes rose the phoenix of an invigorated United States, which had greatly expanded its economy and global influence during wartime. President Truman and the 80th Congress hoped that their cornerstone foreign policy institution, the United Nations, would usher in an era of multilateralism and dialogue. Using its newly obtained international power, the U.S. spearheaded the reconstruction of the Western geopolitical landscape, and most relevantly, the reorganization of former colonial holdings in Africa, East Asia, and the Middle East. On November 29, 1947, when the United Nations agreed to pass Resolution 181 and concede Great Britain's Palestinian land claims to Israel, they sowed the seeds of a persistent cultural tension and permanently secured a foothold for Western powers in the Arab world. For Zionist Jews, this was a triumph of pan-European foreign policy in guaranteeing Jewish sovereignty at last. For Palestinian Arabs, this was a tragedy of displacement and political exclusion. Although the modern state of Israel was only formally established during the late 1940s by the UN, its formation was the result of far-reaching, powerful cultural trends. Jerusalem, located just 40 miles inland from the Mediterranean Sea, holds immense significance in the Jewish religion. It is the holy city, the designated capital of the Israeli state. More specifically, the Temple Mount is the most sacred location for Judaism, where two temples built by Jewish religious figures, King Solomon and King David, circa 1000 BCE, nearly 3 millenniums ago, once stood. Thus, since the time of the Roman Empire, after the Jews were driven out of this region, there has long been a sizable Jewish presence, as well as a cultural desire to re-establish this homeland on a larger scale. For centuries, Jews, Christians, and Muslims peacefully coexisted here. In fact, a holy Islamic site and one of the oldest pieces of Islamic architecture, the Dome on the Rock, is also located at the Temple Mount. This ancient piece would be jeopardized by gradually accelerating developments occurring on the European continent thousands of miles away. Since the late 1800s, in response to increased anti-Semitic violence, European Jews sought to migrate to existing settlements in the Palestine area. Prominent Austro-Hungarian activist Theodor Herzl is credited with popularizing the Zionist sentiment. In the face of thousands of deaths due to pogroms, or mass lynchings of Jews in Europe, Herzl dreamed of establishing an autonomous Jewish nation. He distributed pamphlets, delivered speeches, and even provided testimony to the British Royal Commission, yet ultimately to no avail. During this period, Great Britain controlled the region of Palestine and implemented strongly pro-Arab, anti-Zionist policies to appease Arab allies. These measures included strong restrictions on Jewish immigration and property ownership. As Jewish immigration to this region intensified, tensions between Jewish and Muslim communities also intensified dramatically. Most notably, the local Arab population aggressively retaliated against the increasing presence of Zionist settlements during the Jaffa riots of 1921, causing nearly 100 deaths.
So the concept of Israel came all the way back after World War I, when the British issued the Balfour Declaration saying there should be a homeland for the Jews. But nothing really happened until basically after the Holocaust.
Only post-World War II, when public support for Zionism reached an all-time high after the horrors of the Holocaust were exposed, did the British government begin implementing plans to divide the small region between Israel and a Palestinian state, requesting help from the UN's General Assembly to resolve this complex issue. Finally, after the UN's Special Committee on Palestine granted Israel statehood in late November of 1947, this decades-long mission was complete. The Jewish Agency's chief executive David Ben-Gurion proudly declared Israel an independent state, ready to be reoccupied by Jewish settlers. In the following decades, Israel's founding would be hotly contested by the Arab powers that it displaced, especially Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. Wars such as the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, the Six-Day War, and the Yom Kippur War killed thousands of people and gripped the region in conflict. Though Israeli relations with Egypt and Jordan were normalized in late 1994, the Jewish state continued to engage in a slow-burning, vicious conflict with the Palestinians in the area, many of whom resented Jewish settlement of their land and desired just compensation. The historical impact of the Israeli state is principally threefold. First, domestically, this unprecedented majority Jewish state reversed the power dynamic between Jewish people and the nation-state. Rather than perpetually holding minority status, remaining subject to dominant European ethnic groups, Israelis were able to escape persecution and exercise national autonomy. Unfortunately, already settled Palestinian Arabs were not represented adequately in the Israeli legislature and protested against or attacked Israel's government for its unlawful land seizure, property demolitions, and civilian killings. As the Israeli people gained independence and fulfillment, they seized those same rights from already entrenched Palestinians. Even in the modern day, this clash of cultural interests continues to generate hostility marked by frequent, violent confrontations. The second impact of Israel's founding is more global in scale. Because the young nation was surrounded by hostile Arab neighbors, the Israeli government relied on strong political and economic ties with powers such as the US, Denmark, and France to endure. Thus, Israel served as a consistent pro-liberalism linchpin in the region, conducting joint military operations with Western allies in exchange for extensive foreign aid and preferential diplomatic treatment. At long last, the Promised Land was secured. But this begs the question, for whom? The third and most divisive impact of Israel's founding is the oppression of Palestinian people. One nation was founded upon the subjugation of another. In May of every year, as Israelis celebrate their Independence Day, Palestinians mourn the Nakba, catastrophe, in remembrance of lost family members and national heroes. There is no obvious solution in sight. As increasing cynicism mounts on both sides, dialogue and the liberal values that multilateral organizations like the UN stand for are breaking down. Previous attempts to build a compromise have been jeopardized by extremists on both sides of the issue. For example, during the early 1990s, when Israel's first native-born prime minister, Yitzhak Rabin, negotiated the groundbreaking Oslo Accords that established mutual recognition between the Palestinian Liberation Organization and the Israeli government, guaranteeing limited authority by the PLO over parts of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, he was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize. However, his peace efforts were finally and violently ended by 1995.
But actually, I have very vivid memories of the Rabin assassination because I was watching television when it came over that Rabin was assassinated, and my initial impression was that he must have been assassinated by a Palestinian. So the initial things I was thinking about was, here we go, we're gonna have another war, and it's gonna happen like tomorrow. But then it turned out that he was assassinated by a right-wing extremist, and an Israeli right-wing extremist. And this is a problem, I believe, in the whole Palestinian-Israel negotiations, because you have extremists on both sides, within the Palestinians, within the Israelis, who don't want peace.
Because we are human beings, sometimes you think, if I kill the killer, or anyone from the other side, from the Israelis, or maybe 10, this will give me back my daughter. No.
My definition of sides have changed dramatically. Today, on my side are all those who want peace and are willing to pay the price of peace, and the other side are those who do not want peace and are not willing to pay the price of peace.